good evening. Here we are back in crisis communication. I have with me tonight Dr. Robin Williamson, who is chairman of the Speech Communication Department at the University of St. Thomas. She's also a longtime friend of mine. We've done workshops together and various convention programs, and I've assured her we're going to have fun here, but she's new to this context, so she doesn't believe me yet. Darren, are you out there tonight?
I'm out here. How you doing?
Okay, that's Darren. He's clear out at Cinco Ranch, so we may hear from him periodically. Feel free to pop right in. Got anybody up at the North Campus? Okay, Michelle didn't make it up there tonight. We have promises of a visitor up north, but probably the rain kept her away. Okay, your syllabus indicated that we're going to be talking about dysfunctional families tonight. We are, in fact, going to do that, but we're going to expand beyond that as we talk about relationships that, how relationships come together, but those relationships sometimes become dysfunctional. The things we'll be talking about have applicability, whether they're applied to your blood relationships or just the people you hang around with. Sometimes the lines on where family starts and stops get a little bit thin. But anyway, we'll be doing this. We're up here together because we're going to be bouncing back and forth, particularly in the first half of the class tonight as we discuss some of these factors about interpersonal communication. I do have, though, some material on dysfunctional families, and we're going to take a look at that first. We can make a distinction between marginal families and disorganized families, both of which are dysfunctional. Some people said every family in America is dysfunctional. The question is, how's yours? So you may see your own family in here. If you do, you may see your own relationships in here. The question is where they fit in and so forth. In what we call a marginal family, and this is adapted from, not from your textbook, but from a book by Ellen Janicek called Crisis Counseling that has been used in this class in the past. Marginal families, people are trying to maintain their roles. The mom's trying to be the mom, the dad's trying to be the dad, whoever's supposed to be the breadwinner is trying to do that, but they're minimally maintained and there's a lot of disequilibrium. The resources, the needs are all disproportionate. Things are just out of balance. But they are trying to be functional. They're trying to work these things out. Now, some of the causes may include illness. If the father breaks his back, is in the hospital for several weeks, if the father loses the job and the mother has to become both the mom and then her career has to support the whole family, you can see how that would throw things out of balance. And way back class 1, we talked about systems theory and the need for balance and how interdependence affects things and so forth. And so sometimes it's something as simple as dual careers. Maybe the wife has taken off 6 months after the birth of a baby, and now they've both gone back to work, and they're just trying to juggle the schedule and get this all together, and they didn't get it all worked out sufficiently, and now things are out of balance. So, and we're not talking about the little tiny day-to-day problems. We're talking about things that really throw it out of sync. Child care becomes a problem. The couple may be fighting about who's in charge of which part of the relationship and who's responsible for what, and if the child becomes sick, then who takes off work to keep the baby, those kinds of things. Okay, in a disorganized family, it's even worse. It's more deviant. Role enactment is rarely even attempted, and it's certainly not maintained, and so there's a lot of disequilibrium. And in this case, you may have things like child abuse, spouse abuse, family violence taking place. And last week we talked some about physical assault and sexual assault and some of those things. Well, those are really dysfunctional families. They're highly disorganized. So we just want to kind of start with those definitions right now. Now, there are some things that families should be able to do, and we don't want to bog down in these, but in case you're wondering whether or not your family's working right, doing the things it's supposed to do, here's a little checklist that Janicek gives us. One is mediation within the family, between the family, and society. But, you know, there's a lot of negotiating that goes on there, a lot of buffering between family members, You have to work things out, especially if you have 2 or 3 or more teenagers in the house or children. You know, whose turn is it to do what? Who gets the car? Who has to clean the bathrooms this week? Just those kinds of things. And families have to work those things out. There are marital functions. Partners should receive gratification from one another. But they also have to share leadership tasks. And, you know, who's going to discipline the kids? Who's going to discipline in which way? Are we going to play this game of wait until your father gets home and dad always gets to be the heavy and do the discipline? Or is mom the disciplinarian and the father relinquishes that? You know, it varies from family to family. Whatever works out is fine. I mean, as long as the members of the family are happy with it. But there are certain marital functions that take place in the family unit. And then there are nurturing functions or nurturant functions. Most people get their best love and support from their family unit. At least our society maintains that it's supposed to be that way. So your caretaking, the security of the children, the general socialization as well as sensory stimulation of the children normally takes place within the home. And if that's not occurring, then there's likely to be some dimension of problem to that. But for most people, their primary nurturing activity and support, you know, you run to mom or dad or an older sibling when you're hurt, when you need to be taken care of. Okay, there are relational functions. The people in the family, the members of the family, have to continually adapt to each other. And they have to adapt to the extra-familial peer groups. That's a big word. But I have 3 daughters. And as they move, and they're within 4 years of each other. So as they move through different phases of their life, their social groups changed. And particularly in the teen years, the social groups change. You know, the boyfriends change. So one was more stable than the other 2. But every time a member of the family changes the people in their peer group, the rest of the family has to adjust and balance to compensate for that. They have to adjust to each other as bathroom needs change, as people grow. You know, at one point, all 3 little girls fit in one bed, and then we reached a point that 2 were in one bed and 1 got a room to herself, and then we reached a point that they were so tall and gangly that everybody had to have their separate space, and so you adapt. There's a communicative function. Competent messages are essential to congruence. You want complementary, congruent messages. We'll be talking more about messages later on. And just kind of a footnote on number 5, that the linguistic customs of the surrounding community impact on that. If you're a Hispanic family that moves into a white neighborhood, if you're a white family that moves into a black neighborhood, if you're a Vietnamese family that got transported to this country and had to adjust to a whole new set of cultural conditions. Anytime something, if you're from the north and you move south, or from the south move north, you know, there's an adjustment that goes on, and the family helps support that communication function and helps its members adjust. 6, there's an emancipation function. We're supposed to give our children roots and wings. We're supposed to set them free. You adults out there should be free from your, not that you've disconnected from your family, but you've adjusted to separations, the empty nest syndrome and so forth. You've learned to cope with those things. But a function of a family is to free the children at some point. And then finally, a family provides a recuperative function. Members can safely relax, regress, recuperate. It's at home that you can pull off your shoes and kick up your stinky feet, that you can walk around with no makeup, sweaty and gross, or you guys, I don't know, you know, you can just be sweaty and gross. You don't have to shave, whatever. But, you know, family is supposed to be the place that you can go to be the worst possible you, and people will put up with you anyway. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williamson now. If some of you are tuning in late, let me just repeat that she's the chairman of the Speech Communication Department at the University of St. Thomas, a longtime friend of mine. She did her PhD at the University of Wisconsin in relational communication, and she may be telling you more about that research as we get along. But we're going to start, or we're going to continue, by looking at how relationships develop. Then we're going to look at how they fall apart after a while. But I'm going to turn it over to her and let her talk with you about some of the stages of development.
Yeah, I'd like to first talk about Knapp's stages of development. And the first stage is initiating. We have to start somewhere. This is the, "Hi, Martha, how are you?"
I'm fine, thanks, Robin.
That's it. That's initiating. It's that social grease stage. It's that stage of first impressions. Once we get beyond this stage, we go through the experimenting stage. "Oh, so you like to go to the theater. Oh, I like to go to the theater too. What are some of your favorite playwrights?" The prime purpose here is to discover similarities. Do we know anything about the other person? Do we share attitudes? Do we share beliefs? Do we share similar activities and likes? Small talk and friendship filters are extremely important at this stage. The next stage is intensifying. This is the stage of close friendship. This is the stage where we begin to know each other a little better. We share our dreams and our values. We may share controversial topics. We may share our goals for the future. We may even share negative aspects about ourselves. Did you know, Martha, that I still like to have a nightlight? I mean, that's silly.
Oh, Robin.
That's silly.
Well,
that would be a negative disclosure.
I still have a favorite blanket. But I quit sucking my thumb.
I'm glad. Okay, there are all kinds of verbal indicators at this stage. We have forms of address that are much more personal. Instead of calling someone William, we call that person Bill or Billy. Or one of my favorite terms for my youngest child is Pumpkin. Do any of you have nicknames?
That you'll share.
That you'll share? Any nicknames? Not a single nickname?
Melanie.
What's your nickname?
Well, Mel. My name's Melanie. My friends call me Mel. My father calls me Metch. And my sister and mother and brother call me Metals sometimes. I don't know why.
Okay, these are classic nicknames.
Darren, do you have a nickname?
No, nothing in particular.
Oh, okay, just checking.
Not that he wants to share. Okay, besides nicknames, we begin to talk in the first person plural rather than the first person singular. We refer to ourselves as us or we rather than I or me. We also have a lot of shared symbols and experiences. Gee, do you remember when we went to Eau Claire, Wisconsin to visit Mike? We have these shared memories, these experiences. We also might have a shared symbol, like a piece of jewelry or a ring. We also have verbal shortcuts. Do you know where my thingamabob is? And the other person does. Now, you don't know where my thingamabob is because you don't know me, but my significant other does. We also have much more direct expressions of commitment, like, I think I'm beginning to love you. Now, that's very risky disclosure. You're really setting yourself up for rejection there. So you don't have that kind of disclosure until you get to the intensifying relationship. You also have a lot more attempts to understand the other's perspective. Yesterday, when you said that you were upset, were you referring to our relationship or were you referring to something else? You try to understand what the other person is feeling because it's important to you. Now at this point, if the relationship continues to intensify rather than stabilizing at this point, and actually a relationship can stabilize at any of these points, you can stop at the initiating stage. If your first impression is so dysfunctional, you think, I do not want to talk to this person. You might stop at the hi, how are you? Or the experimenting stage. You might have absolutely nothing in common. You come from two different planets, so you want nothing to do except in a very casual way with this other person. But if you get through the intensifying stage, and if that relationship continues to intensify rather than begin to dissolve, then a substage will occur, and this is called the integrating stage. Now, the integrating stage is an interesting one. It's a substage of this intensification stage. And William Wilmot calls this stage a commitment to a joint identity. No longer are you just Mary, but you're Mary and Joe. People begin to talk to you, talk about you as Mary and Joe. I've been married almost 20 years, and people never refer to me as just Robin. It's always Robin and BT, because my husband's name is BT. We have become a couple, and people think of us together. Now, there's a special caveat here and a special problem. We do not submerge our own identities into that other person. We still maintain our own identities, but something very exciting and synergistic happens. We create something special and something new, this joint identity that comes from both of us. This means that we're concerned with the needs and the happiness of someone else besides ourselves. Now, the final stage of relational development is bonding. And bonding is a formal commitment to the relationship. You actually announce that we are becoming formally bonded. What do we usually call this? Marriage, or the stage before, engagement. Now, Dr. Hahn is going to take over, and she's going to talk about the nature of perception.
Thank you. Okay, we've said earlier in the semester that meaning is in the mind of the receiver. And I've put a little definition of perception up here. Perception involves selecting, organizing, and interpreting stimuli. And we talked about that in the first lecture of the semester, as well as we talked about the communication process. And as messages are sent through various channels to the receiver, that this decoding process occurs, that we select those things that we will pay attention to. We have to organize those into some sort of mental classification system, and then we ultimately interpret those. And whether we are interpreting this as a chair, I can sit in it, it will support me, or as we're focusing tonight, we're making interpretations about the people around us. I like this person, I don't like what they're doing, whatever kinds of things we're perceiving. We know that perception can change. There are conditions that will cause our perceptions to change. And we also know that people who are very close to each other often don't perceive those changes over time. Robin looks the same to me as she did 15 years, just as good, I need to qualify.
Thank you, Martha.
As she did 15 years ago or so when we first met. Maybe it's been longer than
17.
17, okay, she counts better than I do. You know, but you go back to class reunions and you go, oh my, are you the person I dated in the 11th grade? You don't look the same. But on a day-to-day basis, we often don't notice those changes. But the meaning that we assign is influenced by the way we interpret those stimuli. And we're going to we'll come back to some of this, and Robin will continue with some of it. But when we talked about systems theory earlier, we talked about the need for balance in a relationship. And in our little model here, A and B represent two people, person A, person B. I have an attitude toward Dr. Williamson. She has an attitude toward me. We have an attitude toward X. If it's communication theory, we both get along real well when it comes to that. Oh, do you eat raw onions?
No.
No? Well, we agree on that too. But, you know, I hate raw onions, and people who are around me know that well. So that's a case where if the significant person in my life loves onions and I hate them, then we've got to work out some kind of a deal here, or there's going to be this strain toward symmetry. Things are going to be out of balance. But if I'm A, if I'm person A, I have an attitude positive or negative toward an object X. The other person has an attitude positive or negative toward an object, and we have a relationship, an attitudinal relationship toward one another. Now, as long as we've got positives all the way around this diagram, we're doing okay. Everything is in balance. But when you start to put some negatives in there, particularly if there's only one negative, then things are going to get out of balance. And probably because we're just doing this kind of short term tonight and not exploring all the ramifications of the model, just put some things in there. Plug in a person you don't like. Plug in an object that you do like. Now we could put chocolate cake up there, see, and I would have a totally different attitude than raw onions. Do I like swimming? Do I like playing tennis? Do I like doing research with this person? X may refer to an object. It may refer to an activity that you share. But anytime the system is getting out of balance, then there's going to be strain toward symmetry, a strain to get things back into relationships. And so this, oh, you have a question? Okay, I thought your elbow just popped up there. Sorry.
That's okay. I just have a question. You said even if there's just one negative.
Okay, if
yeah. Well, my question was, wouldn't that be fairly minute and minor rather than having more than one? But you said if you only have one.
Well, okay, if we like each other, and this is my boyfriend up here, you know, he loves raw onions and I hate them. There's only one negative on the model. It's I hate onions. But that's going to throw in, if I really hate them, that will put a big kink in the relationship. If he likes tennis and I just don't do tennis well, I don't move fast enough, I miss the ball, I don't like chasing the ball when I miss it. See how that one negative, if we both hate tennis, it's no big deal. If we both love tennis and we hate each other, it's no big deal.
Then it'll affect the A towards B.
Right. So just kind of think through, you know, and plug some things in. If I like this person and this person doesn't like me, then we've got some disharmony there. And so it's probably just easiest to think through the ramifications of it by plugging in some different examples. Karen, were you going to say something?
Well, I'm starting to say it seems like she was saying, well, wouldn't that be fairly minute? And I thought that if you could assign sort of a scale, one negative towards the object is probably less serious, but where I see big problems would be when you've got, you know, the things aren't congruent as far as A and B towards each other. I mean, I've been in both awkward situations. I like somebody, they didn't like me, and I've also had the equally unpleasant situation of I didn't like somebody, but they seemed crazy about me, and we're making my, you know.
And they become annoying to you.
They follow you around.
Yeah. Well, let's continue because we're going to move on into perception. And Dr. Williamson, let's see, are we doing Myers-Briggs? Okay. We're going to look at some personality types, and then we're going to move into some perspectives on perception. You know, what happens when I think you like me, and you think I think you. We won't go quite that deep. But remember that when we get to that in just a minute, remember that model and how things get out of balance with those perspectives. But let's get some personality types here.
Well, Dr. Hahn told us how important perception is, and I think from my own research, I've really come to think that perception is one of the keys in interpersonal communication. And there are all kinds of things that affect perception: experience, education, attitudes, expectations. Let's talk about two different theories that account for some differences in perception. The first of these is the Myers-Briggs assessment tool. Now, this is a fairly well-known tool used by psychologists to categorize personality types, and it's based on Jungian categories. Now, from these categories, 4 continua of personality types have been developed. The first one is the extrovert-introvert continuum. Now, the extrovert gets his or her energy from interacting with others. The extreme extrovert does not want to be alone. My youngest child is like this. It is punishment to spend time by himself. We all know people like that who want to be with others. They get a huge charge out of being with other people. And of course, there are varying degrees of that. Now, the opposite is the introvert. The introvert finds other people absolutely exhausting. So that person has got to retreat from time to time to recoup energy so they can again interact. Well, what if you've got an E and an I married? Well, there can be some potential problems here because the E has all of these social needs, and the I wants to be either alone or just with that person individually. A couple one time told me that the husband is an extreme E, and on their honeymoon, while she was waiting for him in the honeymoon suite, he went down to the pool and talked to everybody at the pool. Well, she was very upset because she thought he should be in the honeymoon suite with her, but he thought that she should be down at the pool with him. So immediately they had a little disagreement. And it all occurred because of the I-E problem. And so that's one thing that we have to be aware of. If you're an I, you're going to behave one way. If you're an E, you're going to behave another way. Another continua is the sensing intuitive people. Now, the sensing person is concrete. This is the person who's going to count every paper clip in their paper clip jar. This person is great at details, whereas the intuitive person is the visionary. Both can irritate. The intuitive person gets bored with the details of the process, where the sensing person might think that the intuitive person is too abstract or off in the cosmos. It's the problem about seeing the forest for the trees. And we, of course, need both people. We need those detail people to tell us where the trees are. But we also need that intuitive person, that person who's able to see the big picture, tell us what that big picture is.
Where the forest stops.
Yes, where the forest stops. The next continua is the thinking-feeling one. This can be even more problematic because it's a way of approaching information. The thinker approaches situations and people logically, through reason. Plato and Socrates would have loved the thinker. The feeling person, on the other hand, reacts to situations and people emotionally, how they feel about it. They judge people and things how they feel. I feel like I like you, therefore we're going to be friends always. Now, the thinker usually finds that feeling person irrational. How could you possibly judge this situation this way? You're not thinking about it. You're merely going by your emotions. Whereas the feeling person feels that the thinking person is cold and calculating and manipulative. So again, we have potential for problems. The last one is the judging, perceiving continuum. The judging person likes all his or her ducks right in a row, so you can get them all the first time. All details are accounted for. There are no surprises. This person does not like to be surprised. The perceiving person is spontaneous. Whoopee, let's have a party. Why do we have to plan? Let's just see what happens. I went to Europe with a good friend of mine, and I think I'm probably right in the middle. And I think we all have parts of ourselves that are both types. We usually tend more to one or the other. But at that time, I was kind of in the middle. I did like somewhat of an itinerary. I did like to know where I was staying the next night. My friend, on the other hand, said, let's just go and see what we can find. Well, I got more pea-like as the trip went on, just so we wouldn't come to blows, but it made me very, very nervous not to know where we were staying. An extreme J would have been very unhappy because too much left to unpredictability. The J person does not like unpredictable situations.
Is that why my calendar is filled out a year and a half in advance?
You and my husband.
I have to know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. You're a J, Martha. Another key model for understanding perceptual complexities was developed by a British psychologist named R.D. Laing. And his theory is one of my favorites in understanding how we can get so boggled in our perceptions. Now, he envisioned our perceptions in 3 different levels. The first of these levels is what we call the direct perspective. That's my experience or your experience with person, event, X. I like tennis. I love tennis. It's one of the few sports, besides swimming, that I can say I'm pretty good at. I like to play tennis, and I like tennis. Now, of course, since we've got another person, we've got B's view of whatever tennis is.
I don't like tennis.
Poor Martha does not like tennis. So it's your immediate experience with object, event, tennis. Now, we have another step. This is our meta perspective. This is my view of the other person's view of object or person or experience X. So what I'm doing is I'm perceiving the other person's experience. Now, since I know Martha well, and since she has disclosed this fact to me that she doesn't like tennis, I am very aware that she does not like tennis. Now, we have a third level, and this is the one that really causes us problems. And this is called the meta perspective. This is my view of the other person's view of my view of object X. So it's I know that you know that I know. Now, this gets complicated because we are perceiving that the other person knows exactly how we feel. How many times have we done that? You should have known how I felt. I gave you all those nonverbal cues. You should have known that I was upset.
You would have known.
Yes.
Karen?
And yes.
Well, and even worse is the game of if you loved me enough, I wouldn't have to tell you. It ruins it all if I have to tell you. You're supposed to just know this about me.
If you loved me, your perception would be better.
Unfortunately, our perceptions and our relationships are based on disclosure. If we don't tell the other person what we're thinking, they aren't going to know. And all the nonverbal cues in the world sometimes won't tell them.
Except when I have an attitude. You can tell when I have an attitude.
Because nonverbal cues are not exact. We only have dictionary definitions for words, not for gestures or eye contact or expressions. So it makes things very, very difficult. Well, based on this particular experience, several different other ideas emerged. Now, if we agree about the other person's perspective, this is called confirmation. It's simple agreement. I agree, I know, I understand that Martha doesn't like tennis. Disconfirmation is not the converse. Rejection is the converse. Disconfirmation is very dangerous. It's ignoring the other person's perception or perspective. You're not hurt. You're just tired. You don't really not like tennis, Martha. You just haven't played it enough.
Oh.
So what I'm doing...
You're right.
So what I'm doing here is I'm disconfirming, I'm ignoring her perception of the situation and telling her that that doesn't count. And Lang says that that's the most dangerous thing that we can do to somebody else. It's not rejection, it's ignoring what that other person is thinking. Another dangerous term is something that he calls collusion. That's the mutual lie. That's where you agree to lie about your relationship. And there are all kinds of wonderful characters in movies and theater that create this collusion. Now, my favorite couple, or dysfunctional couple, is George and Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. They do awful things to each other. And they, of course, their whole relationship is this mutual lie. They've created a son that doesn't exist, and they play act, and they play act all kinds of games. And so their whole relationship is one of games. And we all know that when we play games, that's not reality. And those games eventually end, and the relationship can crash. Now, two other terms that are problematic are attributions and injunctions. And this is where you tell the other person how they're going to feel or how they're going to think. Now, I think that you should like this movie because I told you it was good. Or be spontaneous. That's one of my favorite ones. How can you possibly be spontaneous when someone has told you to be? It's an attribution or an injunction. Another problematic problem is a false and untenable position. This is where you're backed into a corner. Because of the attributions, you ultimately cannot be who you really are. You have to be who the other person tells you you must be. And of course, there's potential for serious identity confusion. And in pathological cases, this can lead to personality disorders. Another favorite character is Nora in Ibsen's The Dollhouse. She is not allowed to be an adult. She's treated like the proverbial bird in the gilded cage. And when she begins to act in adult ways, then the relationship disintegrates because she's not allowed to be who she is. She's put in a false and untenable position. Now, Dr. Hahn introduced the topic of relational communication and control in her opening statements. This is a very important aspect of all interpersonal relationships. Now, a man by the name of William Schutz identified 3 key areas in all interpersonal relationships. We're not going to really talk about them tonight because they're general.
A week or two
and
ago.
Apparently you talked about them a couple of weeks ago. And those are inclusion, control, and affection. Well, I had a professor at Wisconsin, Marianne Fitzpatrick, and she said, if anything goes wrong, it's control rearing its ugly head. And so we're going to talk about control and what control can do to a relationship. let's first talk about the theoretical basis for this very complicated and very important field. This area was first discovered by psychologist Gregory Bateson in his field studies in New Guinea. And he was trying to uncover how people from New Guinea talked to each other. And so he'd first go to one spouse, and then he'd go to the other spouse. And he realized he wasn't learning a thing about the relationship, that he had to deal with the two people together. So he decided we have to deal with the system of the relationship. We've got to deal with these two people, or three people, or five people talking together or interacting together. We can't know about the relationship unless we study that aspect. Well, his ideas were embraced by the Palo Alto Research Institute out in California. And there were a whole group of doctors and psychologists there. And a famous book, almost the Bible of this field, Paul Watzlawick, Janet Bevan, and Don Jackson wrote a book called Pragmatics of Human Communication. And they set out their whole theory of relational communication. And the first idea is that you have to deal with the system. And people define the nature of their relationship through the family or marriage system. And so we negotiate all kinds of things about our relationship through our systematic encounters. Okay, we negotiate control. Who has the right to define the relationship? Who takes out the garbage? Who keeps the books? Who has the right to initiate the love relationship? These are all control factors, and we negotiate it over a period of time. Now, we work out these rules through our interaction. And so, therefore, we define our relationship. Now, Watzlawick, Bevan, and Jackson developed 5 key axioms to describe communication in relationships. The first of these is, one cannot not communicate. And you think, sure, I can not communicate. I can sit here and be silent. Am I communicating? Sure I am. Have you ever had that experience on an airplane where you smiled in a friendly manner at your seatmate? They grabbed up their magazine or newspaper immediately and began reading it. Not a word was exchanged. But did that communicate? You bet. Loud and clear. Big message. I do not want to talk to you. So they're very right in assuming that one cannot not communicate.
My seatmates never get the message, though. I pick the magazine up and they keep talking anyway.
Oh, well, Martha.
Bad nonverbal cues.
It's just you're so friendly. That's
it.
right. The second one is that every communication event has a content and a relationship aspect. And the latter shows how that content is to be taken. For example, now suppose I ask Ginger, who's a very nice, cooperative, helpful person. I'd say, Ginger, and don't do it, would you please close the door? And because I've asked her in a nice, deferential way, she'd probably get up and do it. But what if I said, Ginger, get out of your seat and shut that door? That would make Ginger very unhappy. And what does that tell us about our relationship? One is a request. It's a deferential request. It's asking for help. The other is an order. It's an extreme dominance move. And immediately causes her to bristle. The third axiom is that communication interaction sequences are punctuated or grouped into sequences. Now, what this means is that we can look at any string of behaviors from our own perception. The classic one that Watzlawick, Bevan, and Jackson use in their book is the husband says, "Well, I withdraw because she nags." And she says, "Well, I nag because he withdraws." Who's right? Which came first? Well, they both came first, depending on whose perspective is taken. And both perspectives are right. So this is something that we always have to remember in our relationships. It depends on how we perceive the events. My English teacher always called this point of view or frame of reference. And it makes a big difference in how we see events and situations. The fourth axiom is that human beings communicate both digitally and analogically. What this means is that we use both words, which are our temporal, arbitrary, symbolic forms, and we also use nonverbal communication, which tends to be more context-bound or signal-like. It's very difficult in nonverbal communication to take that communication apart. Like if I'm going to gesture like this, how do I take that apart? Do I go, And then what does this mean as apart from this? Well, it really doesn't mean anything. We have to take it all apart. Or if I blink my eye, what does that mean? If I do the half close instead of the wide-eyed close. Well, emotion theorists say that it does have different meanings. But in our terms, we have to take the entire gesture. It's sort of like a painting. You can't just look at the colors. You can't just look at the lines. You can't just look at the shadows. You have to take the whole. And that's the difference between words, which we can take individual words, and the nonverbal, where we have to take the entirety. The fifth axiom is that relational communication can be symmetrical, where differences are minimized. An example of this would be dominance, dominance, or submission, submission, or complementary, where differences are maximized, and of course this would be dominance or submission. We'll talk about these a little more in just a minute. Now, Watzlawick, Bevan, and Jackson used this approach to study dysfunctional families, families who were in distress. But their method was primarily subjective. You had to have many, many years of counseling experience in order to be able to evaluate a transcript. Now, communication theorists began to read this book, and they said, you know, this is dynamite, and this has such potential for our field, but we don't know how to use this information scientifically. We have to be able to get the same results or similar results time after time after time. So a group of theorists began to develop a variety of coding schemes by which they could code relational control. One of the most famous of these schemes is the Malhar and Rogers scheme. Now, Rogers first developed a preliminary theme with Thomas Ferris, and then went on to develop a classic coding scheme used to identify control strategies in sequences of interaction. Now, unlike other Methods. This particular approach looks at sequences of interaction. We're not so interested in the content here, but we're interested in the form. What interact follows another interact? And ultimately, how are individuals negotiating their control through interaction? Now, complementary interacts would be, of course, dominance and submission, or on a linguistic level, an assertion or an agreement, or a question and an answer. Those are complementary sorts of interacts. Now, symmetrical relationships are a little bit more complex. They can be of three different types. There's competitive symmetry, where people are basically fighting over dominance. It's the everything you can do, I can do better. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. You know, great song in Annie Get Your Gun, but great example of competitive symmetry. Another type is neutralized symmetry. And this is where basically you're just exchanging information. I went to the mall yesterday. Oh, you did? What did you buy? Oh, I didn't buy anything because I couldn't find anything that I could afford. You're merely exchanging information. And then the last kind is submissive symmetry. And this is my favorite example. Where do you want to go eat tonight? Oh, I don't know. Where do you want to go eat? Oh, I don't know. You pick. Oh, I picked last time. Why don't you pick? Nobody wants control. Nobody wants to take control of the situation. Nobody wants to be the influencing agent. And of course, we all go through things like that. Sometimes we don't want to be controlling. We want to be an abdicrat. We don't want to take responsibility. Now, Martha and I are going to do a little dialogue here,
Okay.
and we're going to discuss it and see what's going on here in terms of Rogers and Malhar's scheme. Let's go to the movies tonight.
Okay.
What do you want to see?
Oh, let's go see Forrest Gump.
Not again. We've seen that movie 3 times.
Well, what would you suggest?
Why do I always have to pick?
Oh, I don't care.
Okay, now we can code this scientifically, and we can figure what's going on in terms of dominance and submission, symmetry, and complementary interactions. Okay, our first one, let's go to the movies, is an assertion dominance move. The second one, okay, is agreement or submission. Okay, so now what we do here, if we were coding this for control, we would have a complementary set of interacts. We'd have what we call a one-up move and a one-down move. And so we have one set of complementary interacts. Okay, well, we don't stop here. We go on. And what we do is we always proceed from the interact ahead of it. Okay, well, there was a submissive move there. So what do you want to see? Okay, we've got 2 submissive moves. We have okay, agreement, and then we have a request, which is also coded submissively. What do you want to see? So now we have a symmetrical submissive move. So we have a complementary interact, and we have a symmetrical interact, which is, of course, submissive symmetry. Okay. Now, our next comment is an assertion dominance move. Oh, let's see Forrest Gump. Okay. So we have another, because we have a submission move preceding it, we have, again, another complementary interact. We have submission dominance. Now, our next interact is disagreement, which is a dominance move. So we have now two dominance moves together. Not again, we've seen that movie 3 times. Disagreement. So we have a symmetrical move, which is a dominance move. Okay, now we move into 2 very problematic comments. Well, what would you suggest? Request submission, moving back into submission. Now we have a disconfirmation of the question. Now we'd think, well, gee, why do I always have to pick? Now that's another question, but it's a particular kind of question. Can anybody see what's wrong with that question? Yes.
Well, the person objected to the choice, but they're so implying I want to choose, and now they're trying to pretend no, I don't want to choose. So it's like they want you to. It's almost like they're asking the other person to. You've got to play the guessing game and figure out what it is I want to go see without me having to say that that's what I want to go see.
Okay, very good. It's also something else. It's not replying to the question preceding it. Instead, but very good. That was excellent. I hadn't thought of that. But that's very good. It's that too. But it's also, what would you suggest? Why do I always have to pick?
You're probably whining too.
Why do I always have to pick? It's disconfirmation. Yes.
Melanie?
It's almost a difference between a rhetorical question when they don't really, why do I always have to choose? They don't expect an answer. Is that what you're saying? And when it is a, the other kind of question, I'm not sure, I forget what we called it, but
It's a direct question.
right, then
Okay.
they're, what do you want to see? They're expecting them to give them an answer, but when you say, why do I always have to pick? That you don't want them to say, well, because you're the dominant one, and it's kind of, you don't expect the
Because I can't
response.
read your mind tonight, and you might as well tell me.
Okay, and it's that problematic disconfirmation, and disconfirmation is ignoring the other person's perception of the situation. Yes.
Well, and that also sounds a bit passive aggressive. It's kind of that thing.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. It also is passive aggressive. And then we have a total retreat at the end. Oh, I don't care. And that's an extreme submissive move, which is definitely passive aggressive. So we've got all kinds of things going on. Even though we have fluidity, which according to what Slavik, Bevan, and Jackson is very good, because you don't want all of one kind of interaction type. You've got some real serious problems here.
We are still talking to each other.
Yes. Disconfirmation, we've got approach avoidance, we've got passive aggressive, and we also have some very poor negotiation skills. But what Rogers and Malhar let us get at is the bids for control. Now, there's a totally different way of studying relational communication. And it takes a much broader, much global perspective than just looking at the interacts. It says, let's look at the relationship as a totality. But instead of testing by looking at interacts, this calls for a paper and pencil test by which each participant, whether it's a husband and wife or usually it's a marital relationship, the persons fill out these forms and they test a particular type. And it's a categorical approach to identifying particular relational types. Now, the scheme is developed through 3 basic dimensions. The first of these dimensions is interdependence. All relationships are marked by an ongoing negotiation between connectedness, where we do things together, and autonomy, where we have our own space. In marriage, the degree of interdependence is measured by the couple's organization of time and space, as well as by the amount of sharing and companionship in the marriage. The second ideology, or the second dimension, is ideology. And these are various kinds of standards or values concerning the marriage. Some of those standards can be, some people love excitement and unpredictability. Let's go to Minneapolis next weekend. Let's go to Hawaii the next. And they decide Friday night and they're going Saturday morning. Unpredictability is the key. Then another value emphasizes stability and predictability. If you're going to Hawaii, you knew that you were going 2 years previously. You plan and you know, and things are predictable.
And you know where you're staying when you get there.
You sure you do. The third dimension is conflict. Conflict is inevitable in any enduring relationship. We certainly aren't going to agree about everything. We're going to have a pulling apart every now and then. We're going to disagree over procedures or goals, or we might even disagree about attitudes or values or beliefs. We are going to have these disagreements. So conflict will ensue. The major difference in relational types has to do with how that conflict is resolved. Is it avoided? Is it swept under the rug, so to speak? Is it actively expressed? Do people fight over significant issues, or do they fight all the time? And these are a variety of different ways that people handle conflict. Well, from these basic dimensions come three particular kind of relationships. And these are the independents, the separates, and the traditionals. The independents we can call our dual career marriage. These people have a peculiar balance between autonomy and sharing. It's a very complex relationship because the people are going their own ways, but they also enjoy doing things together. So they really have to be very careful that they discuss where they're going, that they have things all in line, and the conflicts will ensue because they've gone different ways and they haven't discussed with the partner what's going on. These are very assertive people. They talk to each other and they have much interaction. This is a complex relationship because it requires a lot of interaction in order for it to work. Otherwise, they're fighting all the time. The second kind of relationship are the separates. Marianne Fitzpatrick, who developed this scheme, calls this the emotionally divorced couple. They have a lot of autonomy. They have lots of differentiated space. There's going to be his workroom and her workroom, and the children are going to have their area. Everybody has their own space, and nobody better cross the lines. There's a lot of silence in this relationship, and there are a lot of rule-governed interaction styles. They are very non-assertive with each other, and they do not fight. And I'm going to talk a little bit about research in just a minute. The traditionals are probably the happiest couple. That doesn't mean that they're ma and pa kettle on the farm, but they have a lot of interdependence and a lot of sharing. When they have conflicts, they resolve them immediately. There's little silence in this relationship, and there's quite a bit of shared control. And they share also assertiveness. So sharing is the ultimate concept that undergirds the traditional relationship. Now we also have another type, and this is the mixed type. These are where people don't share the same kind of relationship. I might be in an independent where my significant other might be a traditional. Or we can have an independent and a separate, or a traditional and a separate. Now, some of these relationships work better than others. Independents and traditionals work pretty well together as long as people realize that one's going to be more independent than the other. The traditional separate is a classic kind of marriage. This has been studied a lot in the sociology realm. They call this the blue-collar marriage, where Pete goes off with the boys and Sarah stays home tending the fires and the kids and making sure everything runs. Normally, this is a very happy relationship, but they've got their rules all set and their roles are very well defined. The ones that are really problematic are where there's an independent partner and a separate partner, because there's so much autonomy and very little sharing that they have real problems with one another. Now, this Marianne Fitzpatrick scheme has generated a huge body of research, and I feel very blessed to have been part of that research. I was very lucky to study with her at the University of Wisconsin when I was a graduate student. And in my dissertation, I took her scheme and coupled it with another. I didn't use Rogers and Ferris. I used a different control coding scheme, but another interaction-based one that was developed by Ellis. It's similar with dominance and submission, but it's got more stages than Malhar and Rogers. And each of these types of research together have problems. If you're looking at interaction per se, you don't get the big picture of the relationship. If you get the big picture of the relationship, you don't get the interaction. So it made inherent good sense to me, and fortunately to my committee, that it would make a good dissertation to put the two together. And fortunately, I got my degree. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. And each interaction type, or each couple type, used control strategies in very, very different ways. The independents had much more dominance in their relationship than either of the other two types. The separates had almost no dominance, much more complementary and submissive patterns than the other two types. The traditionals had shared complementarity, where one was the dominant one time, the other was the dominant the other time. So they had this sense of shared complementary patterns. Now, they had some symmetrical patterns as well, but theirs was the most fluid type of relationship. And the mixed, of course, were all over the place. It depended, what was the dominant type. Also, very interesting, some other research that's come out of this, each couple type uses silence differently. It seems like the separates pad their interacts with silence. They had twice as much silence in their interactions as did the other two couple types. The independents talked more than either of the other two couple types and had the least silence in their relationships. So this is a very productive way to actually look at people communicating. You can see what people are doing in their relationships.
And can all of these people be happy? Can all of these typologies, can those people be satisfied where they are?
Yes, they can. In fact, Alan Sillers, who's another interpersonal researcher, has called the happy separates. And these are people who are perfectly happy being separates. They go their own way, they have their own space, they have a relationship for convenience, and usually it is a relationship of convenience.
Meet for dinner once a week.
Mm-hmm. It's what Lee calls realistic or practical love. It's love because we're supposed to like each other. You know, we have all these things in common. This is very convenient for us to love each other. Therefore, we love each other. And so it's convenient.
It works.
It works. Now, of course, we have unhappy separates as well. These are those people who are emotionally divorced and they don't want to be. You know, they want that special kind of sharing, caring relationship that the traditionals have. And so they're very unhappy in their relationship. The independents can have a very vital, exciting relationship, but the trouble with the independents is they've got to get their relational rules straight because they're both always going in 20 different directions at once. I think if I were to type my own relationship, it would probably, we're kind of a combination, I think, of independents and traditionals, because we really are quite traditional, because we have lots of sharing in our relationship. But because we both have very demanding, complex jobs, we're also independents. So we always have to make sure, now, who's picking Kevin up from swimming? Will you be home by 7 to pick him up at swimming? Do I have to take him to swimming? Oh, I've got a meeting in Houston, so I'll have to come home early so I can take Kevin to swimming and pick him up and be sure that dinner is ready for Todd, who's going to band practice. I mean, you have to discuss.
Is anybody cooking dinner tonight?
So you have to discuss these things, and it sounds like everybody's life. But you've got to get all these things straight, or you've got a big mess. And where the mess in these type of relationships occurs is because people haven't discussed their relational rules. Now, the traditionals, by definition, do a lot of discussing and a lot of sharing. They always take their vacations together. They use each other's hair dryers and hairbrushes, and everybody's all over everybody else's space. You know, there's no sense of people having their space. There is, you know, certainly everybody's got their rooms, but, you know, you could be getting dressed and someone will pop in on you any minute because it's that traditional relationship.
You just cross the boundaries without special permission.
Yes, and it's assumed that you can cross those boundaries. It just really isn't all that important.
Now, can you have a mix of independent and separate? Is that a blend type?
Independents and separates are really problematic because you've got one person who's going his or her own way, and you've got the separate who is very closed and emotionally divorced. So,
will the separate be a function of one person or of both?
Well,
or either way?
Either way. It can be.
But that's the messiest combination.
Yes, it's the messiest combination, at least according to our research.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to pause here. On the second half of class, we're going to look at compliance-gaining strategies, and then we're going to look at how relationships fall apart and some of the things we do to each other to ensure that those relationships fall apart. Thank you.